There's just something so exciting about the prospect of eating Mexican food. The exotic ingredients, the bright colors, and not to mention the spicy. However, there is one dish that truly embodies the spirit of traditional Mexican cooking, and that's enchiladas.
You may be familiar with this spicy casserole as it seems to find its way into kitchens all around the world. Whether you've had Mexican food once, twice, or even if it's your first time, you've probably heard of this famous dish. Essentially, enchiladas are a spicy Mexican casserole enveloped in molten cheese. It is all spicy, fragrant, and earthy yet creamy and velvety thanks to the melted cheese that blankets the dish. You can see why it's one of everyone's favorites. However, this is just one way to have them. They can be prepared in a variety of different ways, as everyone happens to have their own way of preparing them, but who invented them? And are they truly Mexican, or do they fall into the realm of Tex-Mex? Let's talk about it. This is History Kitchen.
Enchiladas were very common for me growing up. My mom would make a bright red spicy sauce that completely drenched tenderly cooked chicken and popped it into the oven and bang! In my opinion, that's what makes great enchiladas, the perfect blend between wet and dry ingredients. Now I've had many different types of enchiladas. However, the star of the show is the chili. I mean, that's what they're literally called. As a native Spanish speaker, I can tell you that enchiladas means chili, or spiced. More like hot. Let me explain. In Spanish, you would say to enchilar, which means to add spice to something. And if you conjugate this in the past tense, you get enchilado for masculine nouns and enchilada for feminine, which means that the subject has been spiced with chili. You following me here? Enchilada isn't just a conjugated verb that you'd assign to inanimate objects. No, in fact, you can say that you yourself has been spiced. This is where the culture shows itself in the language.
Indigenous people of the Americas have been eating chilies for millennia. In fact, that's where chili first came from. It was only until the Spanish had invaded the Americas and the Western world was introduced to spicy food with chili, as it's a plant native to the Americas. It was referenced in the text Vocabulario en Lengua Castellana y Mexicana by Alonso de Molina in 1585 as chili being ají de las Indias, or the spice of the West Indies, referring to the Atlantic coast of Central America, and ají being the Taíno language version of chili. The dominating Aztecs of Mesoamerica referred to this pepper as chili in their language Nahuatl. This was then adopted into Spanish, and eventually many words were added into the Spanish language.
For instance, the Nahuatl word for chili is chili, and as we can see in this text, the natives had many uses for the chili as they consumed it in their daily lives. They had many ways of expressing activities and nouns that were related to chili. I believe that they've influenced the way Spanish handles the burning sensation you feel when you've eaten something super spicy.
Okay, let's say you're at a restaurant and you get the free chips and salsa. It's all fun and games until this happens.
This is a phenomenon known as enchilarse, or I could say that I'm enchilado. Spanish has a special way of saying that you've eaten a lot of chili, and I believe that this is where the culture shows itself in the language. Nothing really exemplifies Latin American cooking more than chili. In fact, it's common in many households. My sister actually has a little plaque in her kitchen that reads, "Un día sin chile es como un día sin sol," which translates to, a day without chili is a day without the sun. Cold. Empty. So there's a fun fact for you. In Spanish, in its literal sense, you can say that you've been chilied or chilified. In fact, describing the sensation is a bit of a challenge in English. I mean, how would you say it? This is spicy, my mouth is on fire, this is hot. I mean, how else would you describe it? I always wondered how we'd say this in English moving forward, as more and more people start eating chilies and incorporating them into their diet. Again, this is just in Spanish, but I am curious to see how Asian countries handle this burning sensation. But if you know, let me know in the comment section down below. I really am curious to see how you guys describe it.
Fiery chilies are a fairly new ingredient in the Western world. Many cuisines don't include very spicy peppers in their dishes in Europe and the West. However, when did people start eating enchiladas?
They're commonly referred to as Tex-Mex, meaning that they were created during the old Western days, a time during which the borders between two worlds were... Let's not get into that. I suppose if you were to question whether or not enchiladas are truly Mexican, you'd have to look into the origins of another ingredient. Tortillas!
Tortillas were being eaten in Mexico and South America long before Columbus and the Spanish made their way into the Americas. Legend has it that the Maya civilization had created this to appease a king, but this could be a common story among Mesoamerican cultures as corn was important to their societies. Mayans worshipped gods for a successful harvest and was an important aspect of their agriculture, not so much on an economic standpoint, but as a way of securing food for the people. Although we don't have an origin story for tortillas, we can trust that they have been around for thousands of years before Common Era. If we were to speculate how tortillas were made, I'd simply put it this way: it must have happened when someone discovered that they could grind the kernels into a paste and place it over a fire, thus creating little cakes. We know that this practice spread throughout Central America and eventually ended up with the Aztecs, who called them tlaxcali.
And then the Spanish called them tortillas, which means little cakes or little tart, like a tortilla. I know that's not really a word, but I think you get what I mean. It's not a novelty to know that once these little beauties were created, no time was wasted to fill them with whatever they could find. I mean, they are incredibly versatile. I believe if we start examining the history behind the ingredients and start to paint a picture of the origins of this dish, we can say that enchiladas are indeed Mexican, as they are a culmination of centuries-old traditions. As far as Tex-Mex cooking goes, I'm sure that there are a variety of different ways of preparing this dish, but there's no wrong way of doing it, so long as it contains the vital ingredient that really binds it all together, the chili sauce.
It's very easy to imagine that tortillas were being rolled up with some sort of stuffing and loaded with chili and cheese. However, it wasn't until recently that the enchiladas were captured onto the pages of a cookbook. In fact, it wasn't officially in writing until the 19th century. A recipe was written by women in Ohio in the same century, and it was noted that anyone who has ever been to a Spanish-speaking country, namely South America, will recognize this as one of the national dishes, as much as the pumpkin pie is a New England specialty.
Basically, this recipe has been a staple of Mexican cuisine for far longer than we can count. And what I like about this dish is that it doesn't necessarily reflect a fad or a trend in culinary history. It seems to have been created out of necessity by simply putting one thing inside of another. I believe that although this dish can seem pretty standard in its own special way, it just has a little bit of something for everybody. And as the name suggests, you're in for something hot. And that's the whole enchilada. And what about you? How do you like your enchiladas? Personally, I like mine a little bit on the spicy side with some sour cream on the top to cool things off. Thank you so much for watching. I want to give a special thank you to Josh of NativLang who helped me find some information on the origins of the word chili. Be sure to subscribe to his channel and check him out as he has a lot of cool stuff related to linguistics and the origins of language. And thank you once again so much for watching, and if you like what I do, please hit the subscribe button for more history and more food. Oh, and one last thing. What would you like for me to talk about next? Until next time, this is History Kitchen. Spices and the spicy. Wow, why can't I say it? I literally just said it like 5 seconds ago. The traditional spices, the earthy spices, and the spices. Not to forget the spices. The history behind the origins of the starting point of the old whatever before now. I believe that they've also influenced the way that Thanos. I am Spanish. These look so good. Wow. Honestly. Well worth the wait. Oh yeah. Yummy. Spicy Mexican enchiladas. Oh my god. Yum, yum city. Okay. Alright. Well, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you subscribe. See ya.